Good evening, everyone. So today we will be discussing the newspapers. The first article of the day is government's claim about oxygen scarcity, and experts are appalled by this particular thing. So one important thing we need to understand here is, see, there are multiple ways to look at this particular issue. When the government says, I don't know that how many people have actually died, it may or may not be about a lying, right? It can be about lack of data, because government is not supposed to give inaccurate data, and health being a state subject, the entire discussion about data collection and all those things should come from the state governments. So using multiple sample surveys or death rates during normal times, people have come to a conclusion that death is many-fold than what has been reported. Now, there was no standard operating procedure, and nobody had actually had the capacity to understand these things, because as we have discussed yesterday, if someone dies because of COVID, okay, if he dies because of heart failure, it will be recorded as heart failure rather than COVID, right? At the same time, if somebody is dying because of lack of oxygen, if he's not even admitted in the hospital, let's say he died outside the hospital, he died while on the way to the hospital, right? So it's very hard or difficult to sorry it's very hard or difficult to recognize all this data. And let's say all these people went to crematorium, there was no record keeping mechanism in the crematorium that this was the actual cause of death, right? So there were multiple problems in this entire scenario, and it's nobody's case to argue that people did not die because of lack of oxygen. But the thing is, how do we measure it more accurately? Even more important is, god forbid, how do we establish systems so that these things will not be repeated in the future? These things will be very clear in the future, right? And how reliable are the standard operating procedures that we are going to establish, right? So all these things have to be taken into consideration. So we have discussed census data. While enumerating the census data, we can also throw in the health factors related to COVID, because executives don't prefer to have the blame on them, but data driven policy making needs more data. We have to understand which state, which district, which area within that particular district, and which city within that particular district. So the more the data we have, the more we can identify where more number of deaths took place, what are the ground realities, what are the underlying diseases, right? The more better formulas or better policies we can frame. So in that sense, this particular argument will be helpful in the long run. And it's also not empathetic. See, there are ways to tell things. If government comes out like sounding mechanistic without any empathy and sympathy, it is not going to help the situation, because the moral obligation on the state is to take care of the people. So as Kautilya says, in the happiness of the citizens lies the happiness of the king. So government's happiness should lie in the happiness of the people. So instead of making it as a political game, more accurate data should be released, and center state collaborating mechanisms should be developed. So that's the most important thing we need to understand here. So right now we don't have any of these mechanisms. We need to make these mechanisms either at crematoriums, hospitals, death registry time, everything can be standardized. Yes, digital records can be maintained, so that in future we will know exactly what is happening, and sample death rate ratio can be compared with COVID times. Right. So that's the most important thing we need to understand. Now, coming to this second article, 10 p.m.'s World Health Chief Staffer, Telegram founder, all these people were targeted using the Pegasus data. Now, one important problem we need to identify is, we don't know where that 50,000 list came from, right? Or all the phone numbers that came out. Okay, we don't know the accuracy of the data that has been released, and not every number in that particular list is considered as a infected phone, right? It is suspected to be infected by Pegasus. Only very few phones are actually infected by Pegasus. So that's one important thing. And this shows the scale and scope of the attack, right? Though Pegasus is not a mass surveillance tool, like unlike other ransomware, which will be infected with millions of computers, millions of phones. Okay, Pegasus is a targeted virus. It's very costly affair. It has to be targeted, and it has to be targeted accurately, because when you're spending 75, 80 lakh rupees on one attack, right? You cannot wish it can be installed in a random phone. You need to know exactly on whose phone are you installing these viruses. Now, what is the problem? These are only known sources. Pegasus is a known item. We don't know the unknown sophisticated tools that exist out there. So we cannot blame iOS, we cannot blame Android, because these are still in developing apps 24/7. They keep working on them. New updates, new patches, new security updates are released. So the more technology evolves, the more threats also evolve. So it's not about iOS or operating systems. It's more about the tools that are available to opponents to track us, to know more details about this. See, as I mentioned in yesterday's class also, we only know about Pegasus. Let's say the Chinese or USA government has officially developed, even a more sophisticated app. They are totally mum. They are silent about this. Why will China want to publicly tell, we have hacked the phone of cabinet minister of India, or cabinet minister of Sri Lanka, or prime minister of Pakistan? Why will China announce all these things? They will be silent about it, and they will collect the information, and that's a security threat, right? So the more the world discusses about this, global rules will be set up. Yes, more people will be actively working on identifying these kind of things, right? And God forbid it should not become a mass available tool. If every hacker or every terrorist have access to Pegasus like softwares, then it becomes very difficult for everyone in the planet, right? We cannot trust the technology anymore. So that should not be the scenario, right? So we'll see how the Pegasus story evolves, and it's an international scandal right now. Israel has appointed a committee to look into that particular details. So more and more details will be released soon. So this is an article about number of children who lost primary caregivers, either parents or one of the parents, right? And that's an unfortunate scenario. And according to Lancet report, around 1.2 lakh children in India have lost caregivers. That's a huge number. And also we have to remember, government has announced a scheme for orphaned children who have lost both the parents. They will be taken care by the system, which is very empathetic announcement by the government of India, and in the right direction. Now, what lessons can we learn from this particular thing? The thing is, normally also children in the country are suffering from a lot of things: juvenile homes, orphans. So we can improve the adoption schemes, right? So most of these people can be adopted by families or relatives. We have seen an article where immediate relatives cannot guardians cannot be appointed. Only adoption mechanism is very lengthy. Yes, so that article and this article will help people to have more solutions. We have discussed about SOS NGO, so where orphan children and senior citizens who don't have any children to take care of them will be linked, so that both of them will have each other to take care, and that's a good mechanism to work on. So these are the important takeaways. As a bureaucrat, as a potential bureaucrat, what is your solution? So you are faced with a problem, right? Your mind should be running with a solution. What can be done? How it can be achieved? That's the most important thing we need to work upon. So there is an ongoing demand for repealing of the farm laws. Government has made it explicitly very clear that there is no discussion about repealing of the farm laws, and that will set a very bad precedent. The maximum that can be done is guaranteeing the MSP, which is again a problem of its own. Instrument will become institution. So negotiation and peaceful dialogues are the long-term solutions. The trust building economy, the confidence building mechanism and trust building exercises have to be done between the state and the farmers. That is the only long-term solution, because we don't want the government to roll back these progressive laws. At the same time, we don't want the farmers to waste years together in this agitation. It's not good for democracy in the long run. So for prelims point of view, I don't think this will become a question, but just remember, Inner line permit is in 4 states in the Northeast. What are the states? Whether Manipur is having inner line permit, yes or no? That's one question for you. And the next most important thing is, what is inner line permit? Yes, it has been discussed so many times. I don't want to discuss it. But remember, Arunachal Pradesh has brought in this idea where vaccinated people are allowed, whereas unvaccinated people are not allowed. So High Court is arguing that this is violation of fundamental rights, because even a person who has been vaccinated completely can also be a super spreader. So it's an artificial divide that creates a false division. So that is not accepted. So just for prelims sake, what is inner line permit, the map pointing, and how many states are having inner line permit in India? Now, so in today's newspaper, you can see 2 articles. One is about bear attack, the other one is about tiger attack. Both of them can be linked to animal human conflict. These conflicts are continuously on the rise. That is not good for the wildlife mostly. That is not good for us also. So as I have mentioned here, the same, the tiger mauls villager to death. So human animal conflict is on a constant rise. So what are the solutions? We can develop corridors, we can develop the communities in and around that particular area to understand the needs of the wildlife, create a harmonious space between them, have more funds, more understanding, more awareness generation. So a lot of steps have to be taken to reduce this man animal conflict. So elephant attacks, bear attacks, tiger attacks, these are very common that we hear. It has become so common that we don't even notice them, and it has become an apathetical article. That means we don't even feel anything about that particular article. But just imagine the problem that these wild animals are facing, and the communities living in the border areas to the forests. So they have a lot of issues, right? Next. Okay, so this is a very interesting article by Mr. Happyman Jacob. Now, so he is saying India must directly engage with Taliban. Now, he brings this article in multiple layers. The first layer is why, or what is the fact? Like, Indian government is trying to discuss with Taliban, not explicitly, not directly. We are doing it indirectly through different other countries, through back channels, through half-hearted efforts. That is what he says. So we are in touch with Taliban, but we are not totally in touch with Taliban. That is a fact. And then he moves on to proceed to give 5 reasons why Indian government is not so happy to talk to Taliban directly. And the first and most important thing is, we have always given this support that India discusses with Afghanistan government. Democratically elected Afghanistan government is the only legitimate source that we identify, whereas China, Russia, USA, Pakistan, everybody, even Qatar, when all these people are actually interested in directly negotiating with Taliban, India is the only country which said there is no such thing as good Taliban, bad Taliban. We will not discuss with the Taliban directly because there is a democratically elected government of Afghanistan. So if we move towards Taliban, okay, just like the criticism we have given, legitimizing the terrorists by delegitimizing the government, we will alienate the support of the Afghanistan government, right? So the closest friends are whosoever we have in Afghanistan, we will be losing, and we might be pushing them into the hands of the Chinese. So almost all our neighbors are right now very close to China, except perhaps Bhutan, right? So we will lose the Afghanistan friendship or friends whosoever we have in Afghanistan. So that's one argument he makes. The next argument is whom to talk to within the Taliban. So this also has been discussed multiple times. Taliban is not a homogeneous group. There are hundreds of splinter groups. There are so many leaders. Some are against Pakistan, some are pro-Pakistan, some are against China. Like this, so many different ideologies are there within Taliban. If we negotiate with one group, and if a different group captures the power or have more say in the governance, then we will be having a lot of problems. So Indian government probably is waiting very smartly, patiently, to actually know what will happen when Taliban or what will Taliban do in the next 6 months? And based on that, probably we are waiting to negotiate. And the third one is, we don't know whether Taliban have actually changed. There is a very lengthy article in today's Indian Express which argues from extremism to modernism, moderate. The Taliban is changing in a way, but we haven't seen any such symptoms recently, right? 22 Afghan soldiers have been beheaded. Already Sharia law has been imposed. So there are so many things that are happening in Afghanistan which we don't know. And one more reason is, what will they do after capturing the Kabul? That means once they totally occupy the Afghanistan entire control, whatever 15% or 10% is under the government control, once even that is lost, then what will Afghanistan do? Will they actually respect the peace deal made with the USA, which is not giving safe harbor to any anti-American activities or any terror activities in Afghanistan? We don't know. Maybe if they need funds, they will do this. Okay. Or they might go for poppy cultivation, cannabis, right? So they might support this drug money, and the drug money is used by traffickers and other immoral actors that might cause global pain. So we don't know how Taliban are going to work or how they are going to react. And last but not the least, he says Pakistan reacting very harshly to the Indian dialogue with Taliban. Pakistan might provoke, the separatists within Kashmir, or the mercenaries, right? The Taliban themselves, a section of Taliban can be driven towards India. A lot of problems can be created by Pakistan, which has a good amount of control and say in Taliban. To avoid all these things, that is why India is not discussing or negotiating with Taliban. But in spite of telling all these things, he moves on to say that what do you have to lose? Anyhow, you are losing, you are in a bad position, and it's a ground reality that Afghanistan is going to come into the power. It's nobody's case. So why not negotiate with Taliban? Personally speaking, I have a very, very serious issue with this entire logic that we should negotiate with Taliban. We should negotiate with Taliban. What is there to negotiate, and what are we going to gain about it? Okay, at least the moral authority we have, we can keep it safe by not negotiating openly. You can always have a backdoor channel. We can always have a backdoor channel either through different Middle Eastern countries or through direct negotiations, right? When we have an access through backdoor channels, anyhow, it's not like we are going to send our embassies and all these people into Afghanistan again, right? Knowing very well that it's under Taliban control. We know that all our Indian assets, what are they, right? Dams, parliaments, they are not going to be used anyhow. When we know all these things, what is the point in officially giving the blessings to Taliban, right? Second thing, the moral authority India have right now in relation to criticism of Taliban is very clear. If Taliban is beheading someone, if Taliban is acting in an atrocious fashion, we will say Taliban should not do this. Human right violation is happening. Once we start officially negotiating with Taliban, right? If they do some human right atrocity, we cannot explicitly condone them because we are afraid that we will lose the friendship, right? Then we are compromising in more ways than one. Yes, again, this is totally my personal opinion, just like his personal opinion. There is no harm in negotiating with Taliban, but giving it a legitimate blessing is a very wrong step at this particular point of time. What Mr. Jaishankar and his team are doing are more than perfect. I think the backdoor channel should be kept open, and we should be able to take the help of Russia or other countries to bring Taliban to some kind of negotiation or a peaceful deal, not to destroy Indian assets. We can pump money, we can maintain the assets for 5 or 10 years. And what is the long run? See, everybody is discussing about next 6 months. We'll just think about 5 years, 10 years. What to do? Only when America came after 2001 attacks, okay, the Taliban were driven home and the Afghanistan government was established. I don't see any hope in the next 5 years that there will be a peaceful election and there will be a democratic transition of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is going to be in a very chaotic state, right? When we know that it is going to be in a chaotic state, there is no hope, right? 5 years down the line or 8 years down the line, again, some American president or someone has to take intervention once we are fed up with the atrocities of the Taliban. Probably that forceful democratic transition will happen, and someone like Ashraf Ghani will be reinstated. That is the only way I can see of. Again, this is pure speculation. But the thing is, Taliban, elections, democracy, these things, three things don't go in same page. Probably they are not even in same library, right? Then 5 years, how do we justify that moral atrocities, right? We are only legitimizing the moral atrocities that are going to be committed. Right now, we have all the moral authority in the world to criticize them. Yes. And second thing, if we want to cry about Afghanistan, we have to cry about Myanmar, we have to cry about Yemen, Syria, probably North Korea. So human rights violations are happening everywhere, wars are happening everywhere. And we are not so innocent to believe that Taliban will give us a safe passage to access Afghanistan to Chabahar port, and we will do trade in Central Asia. So all these are like purely science fiction, right? Even if Taliban wants to do that, Pakistan will make sure that they are not interested. So when we have so much to lose and there is no way forward, I think the best thing to do is wait. Let them do something stupid, then we will be proved right by not negotiating with them. And at the same time, in as I have discussed earlier also, India is not the only country which is hell bent on Afghanistan free from terror activities. Unlike in 2000s, the terrorism has changed, the dynamism has changed. Everybody understood terrorism anywhere is a threat to peace everywhere. China doesn't want that, Russia doesn't want that, even Pakistan don't want that, India definitely don't want that, America doesn't want that. When so many, Iran doesn't want that, when so many global superpowers don't want Afghanistan to become a global terror house or a university of terrorism, right? India is not alone. India can rake up the help of all these people. India can make sure that a future coalition is created where we are definitely targeting all these all these terror activisms. Yes, when some kind of legitimacy, any kind of legitimacy, either through power, hook or crook in Afghanistan is established, then entering is much more saner thing. And there is no permanent friends or enemies in international relations, right? Everybody goes through vested interest. If I'm a terrorist group who wants to maintain the entire stability, I need more money. If India is one more player who is willing to give me certain amount of money, I will happily take it, right? And second thing, our forces are super strong. We have more technology, we have more intelligence gathering. We should not be totally living in the fears of 2000 that infiltration will increase. We have fenced our borders, we have drones, we have the latest technology, satellite capacity has improved. So a lot of uh, things have changed at the ground level. We cannot see the things in the same prism and say claim. My only my coming back to the entire discussion, the things we have to remember is this: 5 years down the line, where is Afghanistan going to be? Afghanistan is going to be in a very poor state with a lot of human rights violations, atrocities. Women and girl child in Afghanistan will be suffering a lot, right? Uh, in that scenario, there is not a single institution, single country in the world which can claim moral authority by saying, I told you so. India is that country. India is the only country as of now which can say, I told you so. That is why we never negotiated with Taliban. That is why we don't want to legitimize Taliban. We always said Ashraf Ghani was a better bet, right? And second, one argument he makes is India's overreach to Taliban should have started a long time ago. Everybody prayed that Taliban will die away, right? We knew it's not dying away. It's controlling a vast amount of territory, even when America was there. But it's waiting for its time, right? When it was waiting for its time, instead of negotiating with Taliban, there should have been some consensus among all these countries like Russia, China, Pakistan, India, USA. USA should have taken that argument, right? It didn't. We never pushed USA, and USA was more than happy to pull away. So we have to cry about all the human right violations, right? All the wars, so that we should not look it from a narrow prism of protecting our own interest. Our interest is much longer. Our interest is next to superpower, which have that moral authority. We don't want to be the USA. We don't want to be the China. We want to be the best India possible. I think in that direction, it's a very bad idea. Keep the back doors open, negotiate, protect your interest by giving them certain amount of money, like rent seeking behavior. You are doing the right things, at the same time you are maintaining your moral authority. It's a win-win scenario, right? a cardinal omission in the COVID package. Right. So this particular article is about manpower in the health system. We have seen this in reality also when we are discussing about COVID and other issues. There are ventilators available, not oxygen masks. So please remember, oxygen mask is when the SOP level is around 94 to 90. Oxygen mask will do, people will recover. Ventilator is a much severe issue, and it has to be placed within your throat. It's more technical, and it has to be given only through trained personnel. There were ventilators available, but the people who knew how to use the ventilators were not there. So that is why some people have died or some cases have increased. So that is the problem with he is trying to discuss about. That means you have the best of the infrastructure, oxygen cylinders, concentrators, everything is there, but we don't have the manpower to utilize it, to supervise, to give the right advice in the right time, to make sure that you are able to get the right help. So invest in these kind of people, the nurses, the trained personnel at the earliest, either in labs or other places. Everywhere we need manpower, right? The more the manpower, the quicker the system will work and the better will be the protection. See, third wave or fourth wave will never be same like the second wave, because vaccination is happening, that will reduce the burden. At the same time, more oxygen is available right now, more camps have been set up. But the thing is, these are all infrastructural changes, but manpower change is not happening, as he rightly argues. The most important thing we have to also remember is health comes under state. So there is no point in blaming central government or any one institution like you haven't done this. Every state government successfully from last 75 years in almost all the states have failed its citizens. That is why we are in this particular situation. So there should be a consensus. There should be a all CM PM meeting where they have to understand, come together, discuss, lobby, get more funds, start hiring people, train them, change the things that are required, have more nurses and doctors. Recently, we have seen an article which argues that Kerala had more doctors than recommended or more beds than recommended. That is why it was able to reduce the COVID cases, whereas Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and other states failed to do so. So the more empirical data we have, the better, right? So that should be the focus. And here it's not the problem of any one particular state. Each and every state have the same problem, right? It has to be rectified, and it has to be done in letter and spirit as soon as possible. So at the same time, we have to remember we cannot waste the money. I mean, we cannot waste the opportunity. We have to invest both in infrastructure and the manpower. If you remember, a few days ago, there was an article where Supreme Court said we will look into the policy intervention. Like we will see how much can Supreme Court come into the picture. I told we follow the standard operating procedure. Like let's say World Health Organization benchmark or NITI Aayog benchmark or anything, whatever we have the best benchmarks. This many number of doctors are supposed to be there. This many number of nurses are supposed to be there. This many number of people who are skilled and trained enough to work in ICU should be there. So all such things should be identified, and each and every state should start working in this particular direction. Then there is no need for judicial intervention, right? And we don't have to worry about the next pandemic, because even if we maintain the standard operating procedure, that means the minimum benchmarks that are needed, I think our healthcare facilities will improve many-fold, right? So in that sense, data-driven policy making, this article is very nice. And it brings into the picture that there should always be a balance. If we discuss about health, we have to discuss about everything from number of testing kits available all the way till genome sequencing, number of doctors, nurses, technicians. Let's say we have doctors and nurses, but we don't have technicians or lab equipment. Then what is the point? We cannot diagnose them properly, right? So all these things are not going to help the country unless we change our entire mindset. Whatever we have repeated from last 30-40 years, we are repeating it again. So it's high time we change that. It's a good article, very simple but more very effective, right? Next, so this article is about Mumbai flooding. So the monsoons cause a lot of problem to Mumbai every year because of excess of rainfall in less amount of time. I'm sure the state government and municipal authorities of Mumbai are trying their best, but there are some structural issues. If you see, the rapid urbanization that has happened has led to more deaths, building collapse, landslides. So the rapid urbanization, the inequality clearly shows that the poorest section of the society are suffering when there is excess rainfall disasters. So that's one thing to notice. Next thing is, uh, we have rules, we have policies, we have way forwards, we have documents, everything we have. But the thing is, when it comes to implementation, we are not doing it effectively. And also we have to be very realistic that these things cannot be done overnight. Let's say one of the recommendation is to revive that particular river where the flow is always there, Maiti River, and create fresh holdings of lakes where excess water is absorbed, right? Again, so if you take Hyderabad as an example, most of you must have seen the Musi River. Is it that easy to revive the Musi River? We cannot stop all the drainage to the Musi River overnight, right? It is a perennial problem. From decades, we have developed a drainage system which throws all the garbage in there. So overnight, we cannot stop that. We need to have land, we need to have the instruments, we need to have the manpower. A lot of issues might come up, it might go to courts. So all these things have to be taken care into the picture, and then sincere effort by the politicians in letter and spirit has to be done in a timely fashion. That is when things will start working out. It's not rocket science, it's not impossible. The most important thing is, we have so many issues in this country. In monsoons, for 3 days, we will discuss about the urban flooding, urban infrastructure, rapid urbanization, clogging of drainages, and all these things. Bam! After 1 week, we move on. We talk about something else. So that something else will always keep us occupied, where we lose the focus. And just before the monsoon, some proactive municipal commissioner and IAS officer will try to clean the drainages and all these things, but that will have a limited amount of effect, right? It's not a long-term effect. So that's one very serious problem we need to understand. Eye flows is there in Chennai, Mumbai. Proactive steps have been taken. We cannot say bureaucracy is sleeping, but the thing is, these things need effort of 10,000 departments and every citizen, every 360-degree view. It has to be attacked from 360-degree view, not from one single point of view. Funds have to flow in time. Municipal authority should have more power, right? Best of the engineers, technicians, and all these people have to be provided. Long-term planning has to be there. To develop a sponge city sort of thing is not something that some single IAS officer can do, right? We can, if every house in the Mumbai, let's say, have this vertical garden or something like that, at least the well-off areas, it will stop some rainwater getting into the streets. Again, it's too much rain, but every drop counts and every drop can be diverted. So a lot of innovative out-of-box thinkings have to be developed. The drainage systems have to be perfect. Yes, modern technology can be used to do all these things in a very quick fashion. The thing is, if we have the mindset, I think it can be achieved. May not be totally or 100%. Even if 50-60% reductions is still very fantastic, right? We don't want to see this urban flood topic repeated 1,000 times, even after when there is a plan for urban flooding and all these things, right? Now, this is a fantastic article by Mr. Gopinath. Man cannot live by internet alone. So this is a very personal essay, and he nicely brings out a lot of topics here. So he compares internet giants like Zomato, Baiju, uh, right? How is their valuation so high when a normal farmer when a normal brick and mortar shop is not having uh, a lot of growth? So why this difference? Why this understanding of internet in a whole new type? Yes. So that's the crux he discusses. On the second hand side, he says not everybody is lucky as Baiju Ravindran or Zomato owner or Oyo or Ola. People are content with what they have. Not everybody can scale up. Not everybody can start up, take it to a startup and make it a multi-crore business, right? There are so many fruit vendors in the country, but if you know the natural ice cream, it's a 300 crore company. right? Not everybody in India can become a 300 crore company. If they were lucky, they have a vision, they have a beautiful idea, and in the right time they executed it and made billions out of it. It's totally happy for them, fantastic. But the thing is, not everybody is going to go there. And one more thing we need to understand here is, if e-commerce industry has grown from $34 billion economy to a $208 billion economy as of today, general trade, that means the brick and mortar trade or the offline trade, has also gone up from 699 billion to 1088 billion. Okay, just contrasting. See, because we always say that, offline retail is getting hampered. Offline retail is also growing fantastically. Our purchasing capacity is increasing. Just see, this is brick and mortar, this is offline retail, this is online. If online trade is $208 billion, offline retail is also growing. It's not like, we are totally robbing these people. Next, most of the companies like Amazon, Walmart, they are running in billions of losses. Okay, Amazon recently made profits, that's a different scenario, but for a decade or so they have made a huge amount of losses. Right? And if you compare the Oyos or the Oyo hotel and all this business, they are also in losses. They are not totally in profit, right? So their model is separated or funded by these venture capitalists and the big banks. So they have a idea that in the long run these things will capture everything. But what Mr. Gopinathan argues is, this idea of face-to-face interaction, this idea of having a personal connection can never be replaced. And some people are content with these unique ideas, that personal cultural space, like going to a Iyengar bakery or a MTR or Defense. So like these things will always be there, right? Not everything will be totally occupied or dominated by internet. And that is true to an extent in COVID pandemic, right? We have seen because of COVID, we were unable to move. E-commerce helped us a lot to get everything from home delivered. But if you think about the tier 1, tier 2 cities and the rest of the India, where 80 to 90% of the population lives, there is no Zomato, there is no Swiggy, there is no Amazon. It's the face-to-face interaction with the local store owner, the medical shop wala, or even your barber. So the personal connections never gone away. Yes, and I don't think they will go away also anytime soon. So hybrid modeling will always be adapted by the Indian consumer, right? The cheap and best. If I get something in an Amazon, I will wait 2 days than to buy in the local shop, because I can save 30-40 rupees, then I will do that. So that's the Indian mindset. But at the same time, not everything can be replaced. But like going to a restaurant with a family, that's priceless. Yes, you can order from Swiggy, but it's still not the same. You go for the experience, not for the food alone. So in that sense, it's a nice article. But one thing I want to bring out to you is this particular data that retail is also pretty doing fantastically. It is not totally captured. Probably the hybrid models where your local store will give goods to you using an app might be developed, but again, it's not totally replaceable. Okay. And when it comes to valuations, we are happy that more and more Indian companies are becoming unicorns, right? $1 billion companies. They are doing fantastically. That's a nice sign. It will provide a lot of employment. It will improve our soft power. It will also improve a lot of clout. If you see today, Baiju has captured a American company, right? So that's a good thing for India. That's India and Indians are experiencing. But at the same time, the offline experience will always be there. And I think the bubble will also burst sooner than later, because we will realize the limitations of these online teachings and all those things, because nothing will replace the face-to-face interaction of a teacher and a student. So that's one more thing we need to keep in the mind. Next, prosecutor, not persecutor. So public prosecutors are supposed to be humane. They have to fight for the system, not for the political parties in the power, is the crux of the article. So she cites certain Supreme Court judgments where the public prosecutors were reminded that they have to balance the interests of victim, society, and the person accused of crimes. Right? The best way for you to understand is watch the movie called as Judge.
public prosecutor by default will assume that you are a criminal, right? If he has that particular mindset, he will always think the worst for you. He will always deny, and most of the times that position is, either under political pressure or something like that. Then the public prosecutor is not actually bothered about the means, ways that are used to get confessions or anything. For example, if you see the Beam Koregaon issue, hypothetically, again, not exactly true, somebody was alleged that somebody hacked their mobiles or laptops and planted some evidence. So if a public prosecutor actually comes to know this is true, and he still goes to get them punished because he needs, a closure rather than justice, then that's a problematic scenario. Again, we have to sensitize them, train them, but in the larger picture of UPSC, it can be used as a footnote. I don't see anything bigger than that.
So don't worry too much about that particular article. So this article is mostly useful for your prelims perspective.
Organization for Petroleum Exports, exporting countries, we have seen the crude oil prices have skyrocketed. Now they have agreed to increase the production. So demand and supply formula, if demand is increasing, if supply is the same, price will increase, right? So now if demand is increasing, if supply is also increasing, price will be stabilized. Prelims orientation, who are the members of OPEC? Is India a member of OPEC? West Texas Intermediate, Brent crude oil, and all these things becomes important for your
exam point of view.
So neighborly relations, India and Pakistan. This is the first time both the sides are celebrating on Eid. So it's just a normal routine example, but still okay. This is also a successful test by DRDO. I don't see any prelims question coming from this particular area. Just remember, Akash is a surface to air missile, self-explanatory. So this article we have discussed yesterday, there is no exclusive, they explicitly determined statutory backing to the intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies are very, very important for the nation. I have gone into depth yesterday, but the simplest thing we need to remember is this crisis of Pegasus is a golden opportunity for India to reform our intelligence agencies. We need them. We need them to be stronger, better. They should have the best of the technologies, best manpower, best of everything, preferably indigenously developed spyware tools, not dependent on some third-party countries. So for all those things to happen, they need to have a clear-cut statutory mandate, and they should be working for the citizens of India rather than for political parties. So the balance of citizens' rights versus the threat to the nation has to be managed. For that, it's better India should have a data protection bill, parliamentary supervision of intelligence agencies, right? If not for parliament, a high-powered committee headed by Prime Minister can be supervisor committee with leader of opposition included. So such measures have to be done. Yes, and it's better for the nation in the long run if we rectify this particular costly mistake at this particular point of time. As I have mentioned earlier, if Pegasus is the only known source, we don't know how many unknown such spyware are roaming in the cabinet member's phone or senior IAS officer phones or a worst case military officer phones, right? So because we are all human beings, it's not air gap. We are not totally isolated from the main network, right? Everybody talks to everyone. Probably we use the same mobiles for personal life and professional life. It can be a lot more complicated. Yes. So to know whether we are infected or not, also we need to have some kind of standard operating procedures tools. This is a national security and it has to be treated as a priority. And it's good in the long run if we can learn from the mistakes. Recently, Assam government has brought in something called as Assam Cattle Protection Bill. So Assam government does not want the cattle to be beef to be eaten, right? But Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, these Christian majority states have this concept of consuming beef, right? And Assam is a major bridge that connects these states with the mainland country, and the supply of beef is coming through Assam. So if cattle is restricted in this particular area, the choices of these states are hampered. So that is why the states are arguing that we should have our own law which accepts the beef consumption. So it's a very sensitive issue because Hindus strongly oppose consumption of beef in India. At the same time, we cannot force our choices on others, so that there should be a healthy balance. The states should come to a consensus, right, and slowly migrate away from the beef consumption, again not for religious reasons but for the planet's sake. So this article is mostly used for governance. I don't see any use for UPSC, but the crux is this: if a particular family member who is a government employee who is getting pension, right, he passed away, and the person was either killed by his spouse, okay, then the person was not supposed to get pension, and that used to be the end of the story. Now government is saying the next in the family member will get the pension, and also if this particular person who was accused of killing the pensioner is proved innocent, he will continue to get the pension. Again, I don't see any long-term use for UPSC, even in ethics paper also. Right. So this article is about climate cooperation. If you remember Raja Mohan's article, Raja Mohan's article, one of the points he makes is this: China thinks that one of the common negotiation points with USA is climate change, and that is why China is entertaining this idea of climate negotiations, right? So China doesn't want to appear like it's a totally closed domain. It wants to negotiate with the international institutions or countries, and one of the common platform is climate change. This article actually proves that particular point, and China is trying to leverage the climate deals to reset the ties in other places. See the heading: climate cooperation depends on overall ties, China tells US government. So if USA government wants China to, or need some kind of reciprocation from China, China says, give us something so that we will invest more in climate change. So obviously China, for its sake of its own citizens, has to invest in climate change. But for investing in climate change, as it has announced, right, net zero emissions by 2035, 2040, China is trying to say, reset the ties in places everywhere. So all of you know there is a huge gap between the trust of China and USA, either in trade, intellectual property rights. Recently, we have seen the blocking of FDIs or shares issued by Chinese companies. So China and USA are fighting in so many levels, and China is trying to bring this particular negotiation as a common platform to reset the ties. Not going into the too much depth because not useful in the long run, but the simplest argument here is it should be done more on a moral ground rather than on a lobbying ground. So recently China has seen the floods. It is dubbed as once in a 1,000-year floods. So you can understand the devastating nature of the floods. Once in a 1,000-year flood, right? 1,000 years. So that's a huge number. So such kind of devastating floods are happening in China, and that's not good. We have seen floods in Germany, where we have, in European countries, we have never seen such kind of floods. We are seeing record floods in China. So we can attribute all these things to climate change without second thought. These are the major articles in today's Hindu, right? So no need to make any notes, especially from any of the articles today. More or less, they are all self-explanatory. Just keep an eye on the Happy Man Jacob article. What should be India's way about Afghanistan? It has been a repeated story. We have done that multiple times, right? So if you have any questions, drop a message on the Telegram.